Well, it's exactly noon in Chicago, so I don't know if we can technically say good afternoon or not, and the time zones complicate that as well. So, good day is a lesson that I got from a former board member. If you don't know when people are going to read an email, good day is always a fallback. So, good day to everybody joining. Thank you all for attending this roundtable. We're going to give it a few seconds to let everybody join the Zoom, or as many people as possible, let it even out. And by minutes, I meant seconds. So it looks like our numbers have evened out. A few minutes on a quiet Zoom would be intolerable. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for making the time for this. I know pretty much everybody on this call is probably coming off of CLEC, so you're probably catching up with a lot of items that you had to move to the back burner last week. So thank you for making it out today. For those watching it later, obviously, thank you for watching this. This is exciting. We haven't done anything like this before. So I'm excited to get started. But before we do, let's set the table a little bit with NAACLS mission, which is NAACLS is committed to being the premier accreditation agency for ensuring the advancement of education in clinical laboratory sciences and related healthcare disciplines provided by domestic and international programs. Our vision is for medical laboratories to preferentially seek graduates of NAACLS programs to assure quality, value, innovation, and safety for healthcare consumers. And our values are quality, education, innovation, collaboration, peer review, and global accreditation. Just to timestamp this a little bit, since we may discuss some compliance items later in the call. We're doing this on March 12th, 2025, and we just want to set a date on this in case somebody's watching this a month from now, 2 months from now, and remind everybody that NAACLS compliance requirements can change at least twice a year, and those 2 times, unless it's something, unless there's extraordinary circumstances, are pretty much in May and in October, because our board of directors meets in April and September. So even more important now, just because we're getting close to that board meeting, so we want to be very aware of that, and we don't want to confuse our program directors or our volunteers about compliance requirements. So if you ever have any questions about what's the most updated information or the compliance requirements you should be looking at, the most up-to-date documents are always available on our website, or you can reach out to NAACLS staff and we can let you know what documents you should be looking at. Okay, so today's call is a little bit different than normal Dr. NAACLS. We are doing a roundtable based on all of the content we've been producing in 2025 that's focused on program advocacy. So joining me today is Laura Ahonen. Laura is the Associate Dean at North Central Technical College. She also served as the Park Chair from 2020 to 2022. Dr. Hassan Aziz, who is the Dean and Professor at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi. He is an active reviewer and volunteer right now. Yvonne Banks, who's a Program Director at a School for Clinical Laboratory Science. Robert Cottrell, who's the Chair of the Biomedical Sciences Department and the PD at the Pathologist Assistant Program at Quinnipiac University, and he's the current board president. Dr. Peter Hugh, who's the Professor and Associate Dean of Research at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, and Dr. Hugh also served as the board president from 2019 to 2021. Marissa James, who is the NAACLS Chief Executive Officer, and my name is Mark Spence. I'm the NAACLS Director of Strategic Initiatives. So for the first section of this presentation, we're going to give a quick review of all of the articles and the presentations that's come out the past few months. If you did not have a chance to read all of the articles, when we post this Dr. NAACLS on the NAACLS News, probably by the end of this week, we'll also make available a PDF for you to download, which collects all those articles in one convenient place, so you can have those for reference moving forward. So we're going to start with Hassan's article, Strict Accreditation Standards May Be Challenging to Clinical Laboratory Science Programs. So this was a very detailed and extensive article, as were all the articles that were posted. So if we're going to try to distill it into 3 bullet points for summary purposes, this article really focused on how descriptive standards or prescriptive standards, while offering a high degree of accountability, can also limit how programs can tailor their education criteria and items they provide to accreditors to demonstrate compliance. And it Also, flexible standards really can open up creative and creative solutions for institutions and programs to meet accreditation requirements and demonstrate that they are improving delivery, educational practices, and meeting the overall level of quality required by accreditors such as NAACLS. So one quick quote, and then we'll get to a question for Hassan, is that I really like this quote because it really highlighted practically how flexible standards such as NAACLS can benefit programs. And that quote is, "This adaptability," referring to COVID, "was crucial in maintaining a steady pipeline of new graduates into the laboratory workforce. With pre-existing national shortage of laboratory professionals, the flexibility of NAACLS standards became even more vital as the pandemic significantly worsened the workforce crisis." So a question for Hassan. In your article, you mentioned how flexible standards can be beneficial to rapidly changing fields where new technologies and methodologies are constantly emerging. Can you give more specific examples of how that is true with disciplines in which NAACLS accredits?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And it was such a pleasure writing this article for NAACLS, and it's based on recent experiences in my role dealing with other accrediting agencies that they use more of the descriptive language in their standards. So with that said, NAACLS have shown a lot of flexibility for the programs, and which allowed us really to react as programs accordingly. I remember many years ago when molecular was introduced and was added like as a content area that we have to cover in our curriculum. So many of us just jumped and created a course called it molecular. So we will just satisfy that. But I mean, the flexibility is like, okay, well, and in reality, it's really, you don't have like, we just don't have a department just for that in most hospitals and work facilities. So it's really embedded throughout the program, and the program can decide what's the best way to approach this. Same thing with cytogenetics, another discipline that NAACLS accredited. Traditional karyotyping is not really the way to go anymore. I mean, there's more microarrays, fish, and the programs are always flexible to do what they need to do. Same thing with pathology, digital imaging, digital pathology, AI-assisted diagnostics are all good examples of how this flexibility that is stemming from the workforce practice, that the academic programs can really adjust and adapt to that. So those technologies, as evolving as they are and how fast they are moving, they require constant curricular updates. So for that, it really allows the programs to really focus on the outcomes that they need to achieve, without really going back to consult with NAACLS, like, okay, if I'm going to change this in my curriculum, it's going to really be affected. Is my curriculum, my accreditation is in jeopardy if I don't do it that way. So NAACLS give you that flexibility that that we highlighted in the article.
Thanks, Hassan.
Thank you.
This is probably a good place for me to mention how the Q&A will work for this session. If you have any questions for any of the presenters, we have a lot of experience and a diversity of experience when it comes to program advocacy. We have deans, we have program directors. If you have any of the questions for them, you can go ahead and obviously put it in the chat as it occurs, or we will also be doing the general Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have specific questions for Hassan on his article or something he just said, you can drop those in the chat now and we will get to them in the second part of this call, or you can just hold on those and we can do those over the Zoom through raising hands and how we usually handle it, the Dr. NAACLS moving forward. So the second article was written by Dr. Peter Hugh, The Pitfalls of Prescriptive Standards in Clinical Laboratory Sciences. As you will see, a lot of these articles, we start to narrow our scope a little bit with what we mean by advocacy, especially as it applies to NAACLS standards. Peter commented that well-meaning standards can sometimes hinder the educational process instead of enhancing it. He mentioned specifically that a student to faculty ratio does not count for the varying levels of experience and expertise among faculty members that an accredited program may have. And then he did mention that despite the challenges like limited supplies and tight budgets and staffing shortages, in his role as a site visitor and self-study reviewer, he has seen that programs have consistently found innovative ways to make their program work. And something that stood out to me specifically about his article, which is why I pulled it for the quote, is that it's truly inspiring to see these efforts still lead to producing quality graduates, high first attempt pass rates, and successful employment outcomes. So Peter, you mentioned that you were inspired by some of the efforts made by programs to produce competent graduates and practitioners. Do you remember anything that specifically stands out?
Absolutely. Like Hassan, when I wrote this article, I started doing a lot of reflection over the programs that I site visited over the past 2+ decades. It really amazes me how resilient all of us in these professions are, coming up with ways, improvising to meet the goals that are being asked. And so I began to think some of the more memorable programs. Now, of course, they spans to both resource rich and resource poor. So let me give you a couple examples of the resource rich. I remember visiting one program that had their own line system installed in the student lab. And that was the very first time I've ever seen any program with a line system installed in their student lab. It was quite amazing. Students from day one were able to get the hands-on experience of a core lab, and they're running through all the examples, all their samples through. That was quite a shock to see that. And of course, that program has a tremendous outcome in terms of pass rates and employment, and rightfully so. Another program, a more recent program that I inspected, this was also a rather large program. They were able to convert, well, they had an opportunity to construct their lab from the ground up. So they converted into almost like a pentagon shape, where each lab is a discipline of the MLS. So micro had a section, chemistry had a section, immunohematology, and then hematology. And each area had a central receiving component built into it, with the windows, the makeshift windows, and the students come up with the samples that go through the accessioning, the processing. So really mimic or simulate the actual environment. So that became like the student slash sim slash actual almost like a rotation lab. And so these are some of the more resource rich areas that are able to do that. Some of the resource poor, that I've seen that also made it work. I've seen programs that are housed, or university-based programs that are housed in departments that have nothing to do with allied health. For example, in the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Pharmacy. And yet they're able to make it work because they compete for very, very limited resources, sometimes are being looked at as a stepchild. And those programs make it work. And then what they do is they have a lot of networking built in with the other departments in the biology department or the other departments where they can trade off a lot of their resources, team teach, and so on and so forth. But in all, what we do as MLS is once we're given a problem, we troubleshoot, we solve, right? And we're able to find resources that what we have. I remember there was also a particular state. Now, in this state has a very innovative idea whereby all the programs within that state communicate with each other during the clinical rotation matches. And they ask all the students within that state to fill in their top 2 or 3, 4 choices. And these programs get together and they make a match based on their choices. So it is as though every student ends up either their top 1 or second choice of where they wanted to go. Right. That again, that's another example of innovation. So we're full of that. These examples all across the United States, and it really warms my heart when I see that. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Peter. As a quick reminder and plug, specifically when Peter mentioned the variety of innovation our programs use and him specifying states communicating to make sure that students find placement. I believe that example was submitted to NAACLS as part of our annual survey, because we ask programs about what innovative things they're doing throughout the year. And every January, we have a Dr. NAACLS to feature some of those innovative practices. So if you haven't watched those January Dr. NAACLS specifically about innovation and programs doing new and exciting things, I really encourage you to go back on the NAACLS News or the NAACLS YouTube page and check some of those out. Okay, our third article was written by our current 2-year member on our board of directors, Dr. Elena Blayfield. Unfortunately, Elena was not able to join us today because of a prior commitment, but I would like to touch on her article. And I do have a quick question for Marissa in regards to the context of this article. So in summary, this article really looked at starting to get to the more practical aspects of advocacy and resource advocacy. And she gave her point of view from a dean of ways to begin that approach and to start creating those relationships with your higher administration. She mentioned it's crucial to grasp the institution's expectations of program directors. She also recommends that to listen and make contact with a peer at your, maybe a more veteran peer at your location to get a sense of how that higher administrator may think or work or their preferences. And then really, I thought this was interesting, a focus on regular updating your supervisor on the success stories of the programs and students, because you don't know in what context they may want to draw on that information and advocate on your behalf. So that regular open communication to keep those relationships viable, and then just make sure that the right people has the right information for circumstances you may not be aware of. A quote I like from that article is that effective program advocacy requires patience, persistence, and strategic communication. By understanding institutional priorities, building a strong network, and proactively seeking support, you can make a compelling case for your program's value. So for Marissa, drawing as your experience on a program director, this article mentions building support networks, though I think everybody on this call knows it's not uncommon for some programs to be a one-person show. I think Yvonne is in that situation currently. So for program directors that find themselves maybe a little bit isolated, do you have recommendations for building networks that can still be resources?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. I do have a lot of ideas for resources to build your network. One of the things that is kind of nice about the workforce shortage is there are a lot of organizations who have skin in the game and who are wanting to help with the laboratory workforce shortage. So if you want to interact with other program directors, you've got a lot of different opportunities. Generally, the local AACLS chapters have 1 or 2 sessions in their meetings, in their chapter meetings, that talk about education. Obviously, there's the Clinical Laboratory Educators Conference. Even ASCP is dabbling in getting program director involvement. And really what you want to do is figure out a way to interact, if you can in person, especially with fellow program directors. And what I've seen is even if you can get to one of those meetings, a lot of program directors will form their own little group chats or email groups, and they just kind of pick each other's brains and they support each other and encourage each other when things, get rough. And so I think that's incredibly helpful. We also have the CLS Educators Listserv. That's another really great resource, and program directors, really just educators in general, love sharing their knowledge. And when I was a program director, I used that many times, and I would set up, this was before Zoom, but I would set up phone calls with other program directors, and they would kind of talk me through some of their challenges, but they would also talk me through some of their solutions, and they would share maybe an Excel spreadsheet for something, but they were very willing to assist. And also something that another way that I felt was really good from Elena's article was reaching out to other directors in your university or at your hospital. And so if they're running similar programs, that could be in a different discipline, again, those collaborations, kind of like what Peter had mentioned, can be really beneficial. Sharing workspace, sharing any sort of collaboration, there could be a lot of opportunities. Even so, let's just say you made a friend in another department, they could also speak up on your behalf, and they're like, oh, well, I don't need that resource, but maybe my friend over in the laboratory program, that sounds like something they might need. I guess really my point is, don't isolate yourself, don't be alone, and it's really, really important to find a support network, whether that's virtual or in person, that can really be helpful, because this job can be really it can be tough at times.
Thanks, Marissa.
Yep.
So if relying on my, to be quite honest, average math skills, I believe our fourth article was by Laura Ahonen, and that really, again, narrowing down and drilling down on this topic of advocacy, really started to talk about what the role of data and hard evidence can play in your request for advocacy. So three of the many things she mentioned was to analyze your current faculty workload, project the impact of additional faculty, specifically highlighting student benefits and financial considerations, and create a proposal based on data. And the quote I chose is, don't assume they understand the intricacies of your program needs. Take the time to explain your data, demonstrate the impact of additional faculty, and articulate how these changes align with institutional goals. So Laura, you mentioned a well-organized proposal in your article. So can you give some information on what that may specifically mean to you?
Oh, sure. Well, it is not an email. So it is really something that your supervisor can take with them as they move throughout the organization and present to executive leadership. It should follow a logical structure and start with the progression of, this is our current state. This is what our faculty does, and include student testimonials or student quotes. Administrators love to support students and provide good student experiences. So including that student feedback would be important as well, and really highlighting the current situation of the program. And by adding on additional faculty, what will the state of the program then look like? What things that aren't being done now would be able to be accomplished if there was additional support within that program? Administration also, I mean, you're really selling something. And so when you sell something, there's a cost to it. So include that, just be upfront. This is the cost, likely cost, but with this cost comes this potential gain as well. Could we take on more students, add a secondary, maybe different program, maybe a certificate level program, a smaller credential? How would that adding in a faculty allow that program to grow? And then show the costs associated with not having that additional faculty as well. Are we losing students because we're not able to support them on their educational journey? There's a cost associated with losing students as well. So really be concise, logical, and try not to have it all text. Incorporate some tables, comparison tables or graphs if you can. Feature student feedback, kind of make that student feedback highlighted so that when your supervisor again goes into those financial budget meetings, they have a clear, concise picture of how the program could grow if they were awarded that extra support.
Thanks, Laura. The last of our articles was by Yvonne Banks, and while I thank all of the people who contributed to the articles, a special thanks to Yvonne. She is a brand new program director. She has not volunteered for NAACLS yet, hopefully, and I thought she showed a lot of trust and honesty in her article. That article really gave a first-person account of reviving a dormant program and learning how to advocate on the fly and educate your administration so they help better understand what you really need. So some items that stood out to me in Yvonne's article was that the expectations of the PD position were unclear upon hiring, and the situation she walked into was considerably different than what she imagined. There was extensive misconceptions about the role of the MLS and what they did in the hospital and the real depth of the education required to produce competent practitioners. But she noted that once the investment of time and effort of that education was spent, it really started to pay off with partners, administrative partners for the program. And a quick quote, advocating for an MLS program is continual effort, but persistence pays off. Remember to aim high, negotiate, and make your voice heard. So Yvonne, your article touches on the efforts you had to make so your administration understood the role of MLS professionals and the wide scope of the education needed for those professionals. If you had to do it all over again, knowing what you know now, is there anything you would have done differently to bring them up to speed, perhaps faster?
Well, thank you first off. And secondly, no, I don't think so. I think slow and steady wins the race. Honestly, to educate people that do not understand what we do in the laboratory, it just takes time, and having to repeat myself over and over, just I guess beating a nail, until they just honestly get it. I for myself, I would have done more research. I call my NAACLS binder my NAACLS Bible, because a lot of the things that we do need to make this program successful, it is listed there, and you do kind of have to think outside of the box for some of the things that you do need. So I would have did more research inside of my NAACLS Bible, and then, given a better outline of it instead of going as slow as I did. But I must say that, we are at a good point now, and I believe that the program is running well and everybody does understand what's needed.
All right, thanks, Yvonne. So while that was all of our articles, our CEO, Marissa James, and our board president, Robert Cottrell, did have a presentation at CLEC speaking generally about advocacy, not directly related to NAACLS standards because of their conflict of interest policies. But that presentation zoomed in on identifying and leveraging critical metrics to build a compelling case for additional faculty resources, developing and implementing effective advocacy plans for institutional support, exploring innovative solutions to maintain program integrity and quality education. And a quote I got from their slide deck was, if you are successful in securing resources, your job advocating is not done. Administrators want to know their money was spent wisely, and you need to ensure continuous support and sharing your success. So through the series of our articles, we started at a 10,000-foot view of accreditation standards. We drilled all the way down to practical experience, advocating for somebody's program. And now we have this follow-up in very NAACLS fashion of how do you keep the process going continually. So Marissa and or Robert, what would be the first thing you would do after securing resources to ensure that you are better positioned for more resources in the future?
Robert, you want to go? You want me to go?
Absolutely. I'll go. Thank you all. So you want to demonstrate your immediate impact, right? You should be collecting the data on how the newly secured resources are improving faculty workload, student learning outcomes, program efficiency, and research productivity, if that was woven in. I believe Marissa and I spoke about this in our presentation. You want to showcase your success stories, okay? You want to develop those stories, share that with your marketing, share that with your administration, share that with your advisory board, your alumni, the community at large. Here you're creating those testimonials from students and faculty. You want to illustrate the tangible benefits and demonstrate the investment, into your program and the support you received from your institution. You want to maintain regular communication with administrators, right? So you want to make sure that you are active, not only with your one-on-one meetings with your faculty, your students, your advisees, but make sure you set up, quarterly or bi-yearly advisory council meetings, but maintain a one-on-one structure with your supervisor, your dean, your chair. That is really effective in making sure that you are at the forefront of keeping your hand on the pulse of what's going on, but you're staying in front of the ever-changing landscape of education and research. Always align with your institutional goals, right? Connect the success of your resources to your university, your department, your program strategic plan, following accreditation requirements, and looking at workforce demands. And in doing so, that's also part of developing a sustainability plan. Ensure that these newly secured resources, faculty positions, capital expenditures and equipment and so forth is utilized efficiently, and propose some sort of future research needs based on long-term data-driven projections that you're gathering.
Marissa, did you have any follow-up to that?
No, I mean, share. That's, showcase. Give a little bit of credit to the person who gave you that resource. Boost them up, make them feel good for, having a positive impact on your program, your students, your faculty. It'll just really kind of set the stage for future asks.
Great. So that was a quick run through of all of our presentations. Again, we will provide a collection of the articles in a PDF with this link when we have the link ready for the NAACLS News for the on-demand. Also, if it's not available already, I believe soon, if you went to CLEC, you would be able to view Robert and Marissa's presentation through the app. So again, if you want to revisit some of those items in the context of kind of hearing this discussion here, we're about ready to move on to Q&A. If you have any questions for any of the panel members, enter them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I will give you the permission to speak. Before so, I want to make sure that you know that all the resources available for you, including NAACLS staff, always here to help if you have any questions about the standards or processes. You see all of the staff, and also I've included our board president and review committee chairs as resources you have for any NAACLS related questions. NAACLS has volunteers that we identify as discipline lead persons. These are current review committee members who are there for programs when it comes to questions about standard interpretation. So if you have a question about closing the loop in standard 2, or how items should be posted on your website in standard 4, these are the perfect people for that. If you have more process questions, when's a self-study due, when can you expect fees, items like of that nature, those should be directed towards staff. If you don't know where your question falls, always I encourage you to start with staff. And also, I do want to highlight we are a volunteer-driven organization. All the names you see on this page are volunteers. People have taken time out of their busy schedules to give to NAACLS. Most of the people on this call are volunteers, and I also see many volunteers in the audience of this call. So thank you to our volunteers for helping us maintain the high quality of accreditation that we've established up until now. So a few important reminders and then we'll get to Q&A. So nominations for review committee and board member deadline is extended to April 1st. Those specific requirements of what we're looking for are on the NAACLS News. Our next Dr. NAACLS is April 16th at 2 p.m. Central. We'll probably have a registration for that out by the end of the week. We will be focusing on the BMS accreditation process, which is a fairly unique accreditation process, as well as a look at work that our Future and Emerging Professions Task Force has been doing over the past couple of years. And keep an eye out for the 2025 annual report. That is not to be confused with the annual survey, which comes out every fall. That is not coming sooner. The annual report is something we're legally required to do And it's just a general look back at the year that NAACLS has. It's a way for us to benchmark and archive some of those items. So annual survey is still in the fall. This is a separate document. So I don't see any questions in the chat yet. I do have a few, but before I get started, Marissa, I think you may have had one for Peter.
Yeah. So Peter is going to have to jump off the call early. So I wanted to give him an opportunity to answer this question, because in one of our conversations that we had last week at CLEC, I got to pick his brain a little bit and I really liked what he said. So I wanted to share it with you all. So one of the things when you have a list of a bunch of different asks or requests, the tendency would be to throw them all out to your administrator and be like, all right, here are the 12 things that I really, really want. And Peter has a strategic approach to maybe not throwing everything up at the wall to see what sticks. Peter, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. That's a great question. And for those of you who listened to our presentation, sorry I didn't get to that slide as one of the contents in there. What I meant by that was you have to see it through the lens of the administrator. So from our perspective, it's just not the single program who is submitting a wish list. It's all the programs are submitting the wish list for the next budget cycle. And if you have 10 or 12 items submitted, imagine everybody is submitting a whole handful of items. What we do on the upper end is we don't know who has what is prioritized. What is more important, right? So we will rank them through based on the justifications. Now imagine if you have written 12 good justifications, but deep down in your mind, you really wanted item number 7, but you just so happen to list it as item number 7. But from our lens, we will see that as item number 7. And when we rank that against everybody else, that item number 7 may end up being item number 56. So be careful when you submit an entire list of items. If you do, then make sure that you prioritize it with the top being the first. Now, it's also a budget strategy as well. Of the 12 items, you might have a single item that's worth 6 figures, while the others that are 5 or 6,000 range. Be careful how you prioritize that, because if you list your $100,000 item as the main item, then as the top item, that may get funded, while the rest of your items will not get funded. So again, before you submit it all, think about how you will fare your list against all your competitor programs lists.
I think that's helpful information, especially in the context of Yvonne's article, where she mentions the idea of asking for Taj Mahal. So even if you don't get it, you'll still probably get something very worthwhile. And again, it's how to approach that strategically. So the Taj Mahal may not be 15 different items because of the issues that Peter just commented on. It may be a strategically chosen few items that you may be asking for a bit more than you expect, but the bit more should not be in the number of items. It should maybe be in the expanse of the items requested. I have other questions, but before I move on, does anybody else in the panel have any follow-up or anything they want to add to that? Okay, so maybe a follow-up on Elena's article. So we were talking about building networks to help generate resources. Does anybody have any specific ideas or examples of how resources, I mean, these networks have been built, have actually led to resource advocacy?
I mean, I can share if to kind of get everybody going. For me, sometimes it was brainstorming. So when I was a former hospital-based program director, I had a little network of other hospital-based program directors that were MLS. And so we had some of the same challenges. Here's an example. We, and I don't know if this is really program advocacy, but for our teach out plan, some of the local hospitals in the Missouri area got together and said, all right, if you, because we actually had a tornado hit one of our Missouri hospital-based programs. So if if you needed help, like if something happened to your program, would we take your students for a period? That was kind of how we built our own little network to kind of help. But even the idea that Peter had of communicating, what students are you taking? I mean, because that's kind of a resource advocate, resourcing as well, because some of these programs their resources could be low in student applications or, just basically students in general. So if you can kind of share amongst each other, that could be really, really beneficial. And then also just encouragement or support. I noticed that in particular in Yvonne's article. She talked about how she had a network, and that really, really helped her when she would get frustrated or when she would just feel like she is just pushing up against a brick wall. So those are a few examples of how networking can really help you.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Marissa said, both her and Yvonne, you're absolutely right. And this is such a crucial tool at your disposal, and it's so much easier now with the advancement of smartphones, right? And you have to foster these relationships over time when you see them. That's why you go to conferences. If you didn't notice now or then that Dr. Simoni and Dr. Aziz and I were always hanging around together, joined at the hips. Well, that's because we've established that relationship over 2 decades ago, and we rely on each other quite a bit. We text each other all the time because people in the same rank, you will run into most likely the similar problems. And you may not have the solution, but that the other individuals in your network may have. So I definitely would suggest that you have multiple networks, the ones who are in the same rank and the ones who are perhaps mentor or coaching level type of individuals, because life is constant learning. In this field, we're constantly growing. We constantly have to improvise. We don't know what's around the corner. We have some foresight, but having a good network will make that foresight even more clear. I can't emphasize the importance of that particular mindset.
Can I ask Yvonne a question? Because, I read her journey and you could tell, like you had mentioned, Mark, that it was very, very well thought out. And I know that you got frustrated at times, Yvonne. So what did you do when you kept getting turned down or these challenges kept popping up? Like, how did you react and how were you able to stay with it? Because I'm just especially proud that you just kept with it and didn't give up on building a program. And so was there ever a point when the hard nose started to turn into like not yet, or how did you manage that frustration?
Well, to be honest with you, the team that I deal with here, my direct director, she had a lot of insight on things that I did need to do or how I needed to approach it. So that helped out a lot. Also speaking with other hospital-based program directors, that helped a lot. I'm not sure if I'm sure that you all know April Orange and Teresa. They both were like great. Every time I reach out to them, they always respond to me, and I truly appreciate them. I know we don't talk as much and things like that, and we do generally communicate through email, but they help me out a lot. Any small questions I ask or anything like that. We also have another friend that's a mutual friend of all of ours. She was a big help as well, and they helped me brainstorm on how to get through different things and to complete different tasks.
Fantastic.
Yeah, April's actually on the call right now. So
Yep.
right now, I just want to put in, since we're talking about networks, and I figure it is a good time for me to mention that you can always sign up to volunteer for NAACLS. We're always looking for self-study reviewers and site visitors. So in addition to the nominations, which we spoke about a little bit before, A great way to build this network is to sign up to be a NAACLS self-study reviewer. You will always be paired with somebody, so you will have the opportunity to start building that network there. If you like reviewing from there and you wish to become a site visitor, that is another way to start meeting peers that are reviewers or even program directors at similar programs. And that's a great free way to start building that network that we've mentioned multiple times. And in the background, I'm trying to vamp and get a QR code up, but my multitasking is not working. So I will ask another question and then get a QR code up for those who wish to volunteer. So one more question to Peter, since Peter has to jump off and go to another call. And then I got questions for Laura and potentially another for Yvonne. So I guess this one could be both Hassan and Peter. Both of your articles focus on the importance of outcomes. Outside of the NAACLS required outcomes, graduation, placement, and certification rates, what outcomes do you find most beneficial, not only for assessment, we can talk about that, but resource advocacy?
Oh, great. Hassan, I'll go first and then you could jump right up. Yeah, so the quantitative measures are easy to track, right? And so I'm glad that the NAACLS went to the outcome-based tracking those numbers. That's easy to produce. But what's also more important to me, especially with the newer generation of children, I know that in the secondary education we call them, the post-pandemic kids. It's really professionalism. That is something that is extremely important. Speaking skills, leadership, all the areas in your affective domain. In the past, prior, when we used to be prescriptive, when we have to measure our different type of domains, we're more concentrated on the psychomotor and cognitive, and the affective were just there as a check mark. But to me, I have seen that has become more important to me, especially with the new recent kids that are graduating. Your skills, they're important. That's what gets you the job. But the other soft skills is what keeps you holding on to your job or even for promotions. And that is something that is not being taught. I don't know if it's because of the online environment or it's not being focused on anymore. And so when we get the students, they lack a lot of these skills. So professionalism is something that is an important outcome, qualitative outcome that I wish that all program would have it built in and strongly enforced.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and I 100% agree with that. And I mean, it's accreditors, they set up standards, but those are minimum to achieve that level of accreditation. So we always encourage programs to go beyond, and again, like, we a couple of years ago, we had a presentation about the role of the advisory board and why it's so important to have a meaningful advisory board, not just to check a box for NAACLS. Again, that's a flexibility, but again, how do you use it? So to measure that professionalism, how can I get my, what's the word out there about my graduate? It's like it's you want to just have the viability and the visibility of the program. You have to pay attention to those two things. They're really important. So how do you do that? You do employer surveys. You get them back and you read them. You evaluate them with your graduate, with your advisory board. Then you take them to your faculty and see what's the workforce is talking to or telling you about your programs. Alumni relationships, building up relationships with alumni. I mean, it's like I'm so proud on this goal. I have two of my former students, that they are now program coordinators, program directors. So your alumni are really your extension into the community. But you want to hear back from them, invite them back, and it's not always about the money. It's just that advice that you get. One thing that I would like, or a couple of things actually, I would like to, I mean, most accreditors, some do actually, but most accreditors don't talk about scholarship, your research productivity, So if that's something you excel at, just be proud of that. I mean, even if it's not an accreditation requirement to have grants, publications, and all that stuff, I mean, it's really as an individual, that's one, it will help you with the promotion and tenure in your facility, but it was also you're contributing to the body of knowledge in that area. We shouldn't be struggling to have publication, journals, submissions in our journals, CLS or the international journal that we have. We really struggle sometimes finding, our faculty from our program submitting and contributing to that research. The last thing that I want to say, interprofessional education is big. And this is one thing that, that's when you start connecting with other professions. The days that we keep promoting our profession is that, oh, well, if you're an introvert and you don't like to talk to people, or do I have a profession for you? So that we're not asking you to be a Taylor Swift and dance and song in front of everybody, but at the same time, we're asking that, you interact, you professionally talk to your, to your communities, to your leaders in your campuses, in your organizations, and work with other disciplines, work with nurses, work with pharmacists, work with physical therapists, respiratory therapists, and contribute to that body of knowledge by continuing that discussion, that dialogue. They will learn more about you. It's not just that box that, specimens go there, and it's either Himalayas, they're not going to be able to run it, or they are, they just get some results back out of that box. So they really need to be, an effort from the program to enforce and find a place in their curriculum. Don't make it an afterthought. Make it part of your curriculum to have interprofessional education.
So, Peter, I know you have to jump off soon, so if I don't get to, I want to say thank you. We have a question from the audience, and this is kind of relates to what you were talking about, Hassan, broadly. Any advice on advocating for community organizations or local government support, such as grants, opportunities, or similar opportunities?
So community and grants, it's like I can separate the two, like, whether it's private funding or federal funding or state funding, in your institution, your organization, if you have a research office or a pre-award office, make sure that you really meet with that individual, with that office, and have them understand your needs. If you're really looking for workforce development grants, they're out there, not as many as other professions, especially nursing, but they are still out there, and you can just really try to find them. But that requires extensive search, so those pre-award individuals and the research offices, they're really good at that. But don't exclude your philanthropic efforts and private funding. I mean, some people out there, they really would like to give, and they would like to give to a cause, and they really would like to have the cause to be visible. So sometimes even when we're asking, just like a minute ago, I think Peter was saying, like, if you're putting a list of items, what do you want? I mean, not everything is going to be, you're not going to be able to get everything, but what can you get through private funding? One very successful thing that I just did here, we give all our students, the nursing students, I mean, I'm working on the MLS students, but we get them stethoscopes through private funding. So we receive, we submit a request each year, and we get the funds to purchase a new stethoscope for every student that we have in the college. So I'm trying to also do the same thing for our MLS students by purchasing white coats, for our MLS students. It's the idea that you're connecting with those communities by going to them, telling them your story, and showing the need and what we do, for the general public.
Laura, I haven't picked on you in a little bit. Do you have any experience with grants or advocating for more of those resources referenced?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to approach grants, and if you have a grants office, it's often highly regulated on that aspect, but just from smaller programs, things that can be done. We have worked with our industry partners when we know the workforce shortage is acute in some facilities, where those industry partners have come together and developed, it's not a grant for the program, but it's money that could be used for scholarships for students in the program. So really connecting our program here at the college with a lot of our healthcare organizations and saying, how do we work together to get more students out to your workforce? How do we get students into the program and out to you? So working on those collaborative scholarship type of agreements. We've worked with some organizations where then they've developed what do they call it? I believe they call it internship jobs, so small roles for the students so that they can get paid while attending school. So we've also done some service activities. It's not so much in the lab, but in our dental program, we've provided a sealant event for the community, where then a local organization donated sum of money so that we would be able to purchase the consumables. So if we try to equate that to a lab, maybe consider doing a community event such as a health fair where you can provide some sort of testing, a cholesterol testing or something, and then you can solicit funds for an analyzer, a point of care analyzer that then could be used within the program. So it's really important to think outside of the box and outside of what are some of those big federal or state grants. What can you do smaller program-wise that could have an impact on your program?
Before I follow up with Laura, does anybody else have any ideas about grant advocacy or the other kind of more public facing parts of that? Okay, Laura, I wanted to know, I really liked your concept and the idea of being the expert and presenting yourself as the expert. So in addition to data, which your article focused on, do you have any other tips or anything else that can help program directors that may not have the confidence or may not have all the information they need to be the expert when they are advocating for themselves?
Sure, and I think it sounds from reading Yvonne's article and hearing her, she's had to do this quite a bit. It's all about educating decision makers about what the program needs and aligning those needs with the institutional goals as well. Try to anticipate counter arguments and maybe anticipate what the reluctance might be, and it might just be, again, putting yourself on repeat. Use storytelling techniques, try to combine real world examples, student testimonials, faculty workload logs, try to humanize the request, avoid the use of our lab acronyms or even shortening hematology to heme. Don't do that. Really try to present information in a way where you're assuming that person knows nothing about the lab world and what we need to develop, competent, all well-rounded professionals. So be an authoritative presence. Just trust that you have that work knowledge to present. This is what a laboratory program would look like. But expect to repeat yourself many, many times. I think Yvonne mentioned that. She was kind of used that hammer driving that. So you probably had to do that numerous times, Yvonne.
And I also want to expound on what you said. I did utilize these student observations and their trying to think of the word, I'm sorry. I used their oh my God, I can't even think of the word, but I used what the previous students wrote about what they needed from the program to kind of get what we need now. And I utilize that more so in more of my meetings to kind of drive home, okay, this is what the previous students had or what they didn't have. So getting what they needed now was a big thing for me. even just a space. They didn't have a space. They utilized conference rooms to learn in. And so that was one big thing that I had to use to get a laboratory for them and a classroom for them. And they gave me a small space, and I think I've expounded it and made it everything that is needed for the students now. And I think they're very happy with having their own space and not having to hang out in the break rooms and things like that. So I think that was great what you said, Laura.
Mark, you're muted.
Thank you. I've had to train to mute myself so people don't hear me drinking water over Dr. NAACLS episodes. So we have another question from the chat, and this is pretty big picture, but we'll see if this impressive think tank has any recommendations. Any advice on regulatory advocacy? I'm facing issues regarding State Department of Health regulators who are interpreting educational requirements for personnel to have a bachelor's degree in biological, chemical, or physical science or medical technology to mean BS degree in biology, chemistry, or CLS, MLS that trickles into job description requirements. As a certificate program, I'm concerned about degrees that the MLS 3+1 programs are tracks within degrees such as biotechnology or medical sciences, which the Department of Health inspectors have stated would not be considered appropriate. I know that this is incorrect and does not align with current CMS information, but I'm not certain what I can do to help fix this. That's a tough one.
Well, I can please start the discussion on this one. I did have some experience with this in the past, and you know, we have to remember that those health departments, you know, are bureaucrats. They're really not. Most of them are not even, you know, have the education background to understand. They're just looking for English 101, and they want to see that you have done English 101, and they want to see that it checks the boxes, that it's the number of hours needed for that, you know, for that to meet that requirement. And the other big problem is that those offices usually are very short staffed. There are only 1 or 2 people, and they are extremely, you know, unfortunately rigid in their thinking. You know, they think that, you know, that's the way they were taught, or they were taught that, you know, we have to have that approach. As I said, like, you know, I didn't really have where I have my own experience to go and just correct these things, because usually I worked with them based like, well, this is physics. I just showed him like in another way to prove that the science is taken here. And most of the time it worked. But the good experience that I had, like, you know, that or the good example that I had is somebody shared with me that they've been calling that office, and it was only one person in that office, one single person processing all these applications, all these things. And it took a lot of phone calls, a lot of convincing, a lot of navigating, you know, trying to educate that person about that change. And, you know, sometimes it doesn't really help. You know, it does help, doesn't help. I mean, it depends on that person mindset. You know, if more than one academic unit will go trying to approach that office, or the state chapters in, you know, or the organizations in your states, whether they are willing to go out and just try to, you know, educate that office of the requirements. You know, because again, certain colleges, they use different terminologies, and, you know, if it's not called what they want it to be called, that is going to be a problem. Or they don't give it enough hours, clinical hours versus didactic hours. That's also going to be, you know, challenging.
So what I'm hearing you say, Hassan, is, I mean, be prepared to educate, but potentially bring some other people in with you so that it doesn't feel so he said, she said, like,
Yeah.
this is my opinion. And it's like, all right, we're representing a couple different disciplines. we need to clear this up. And
Right.
potentially, Marianne, if you haven't, I'm sure you have, but if you haven't tried phone calls or even setting up Zooms, sometimes things get lost in translation via email. And then it is just this back and forth and there's less listening. I'm sure you've tried that, but I really like that idea of finding an ally. So it just doesn't feel like, well, maybe this, Ms. Downs person is wrong. No, she's right. There's multiple people who need to educate on this. I like that.
Yvonne, I want to follow up with something else from your article. You mentioned engaging hospital staff outside the laboratory to raise awareness. Have these conversations only been effective in generally raising the familiarity with your program, which is, I don't want to minimize, that's very important, or has there been situations where these previous engagements have paid off with an example of support?
So support, yes. And honestly, it's helping grow the program, to be honest with you. Speaking with the coworkers outside of the laboratory, I ran into a coworker and her daughter is looking for, a degree to get, for herself, or, what role of education she wants to go into next. And so, after speaking with me and knowing that the school is actually here, she never knew it, to be upfront with you. And she was amazed that the school was actually here in this hospital. And so, it brought me another student. And that's, what other kind of support do you want besides saying, hey, talking to other people outside of the laboratory? Yeah, it brings in more students as well as support from other departments.
That's great. Robert, on your presentation, I think you kind of touched on this when earlier during this presentation, but in regards to your collect presentation with Marissa, again, there was a conversation about what to do after you've been successful. Do you have any recommendations for internal review or assessment techniques to kind of improve people's skill set as they start advocating more and more, how they can maybe self-evaluate and hone their skills?
Yes, absolutely. So obviously in this process, you are in a data-driven analysis phase. So you want to conduct those pre and post implementation evaluations, which would include faculty workload, student pass rates, graduation metrics. Again, you want to quantify the impact that your newly secured resources have had. I always fall back, Marissa and I have said this previously and in this presentation as well, it's stakeholder feedback. Okay, you want to use surveys, create focus groups with your faculty, your students, administrators to assess the effectiveness of that newly secured resource allocation. And then, look at benchmarking techniques. Compare your program's resource allocation and outcomes with peer institutions. You want to be able to highlight gaps. You need to adjust. You need to justify additional requests, because we talked about this process. Once you get, let's say, a newly secured position, the battle doesn't stop there. You hopefully are on an upward trend for increasing, resources, and you want to grow the program. You don't necessarily need to grow your program with students, a cohort, in order to grow your program with faculty, part-time faculty, staff, equipment needs, space needs. Develop real-time tracking metrics. Again, you probably have already created that under the NAACLS accreditation process, but you want to measure utilization and effectiveness. You want to conduct a debriefing session, again, with your faculty, your advisory council, your alumni board, student groups. Again, what strategies were effective, what can be improved. And don't be afraid in this process to create pilot programs to test resource allocation strategies. That's often very handy when it comes to creating new courses. Run a pilot section, run maybe a 0 credit lab, a simulation event. You can create those types of programs, courses to help review and look at the larger picture and have that 45,000-foot view on what future funding requests may look like, and again, have that data available to present.
Great, thank you. We have one more question in the chat. Another reminder that if you have any questions, raise your hand and you can do it, or over the audio, or I can do it over the Q&A chat. I maybe will take a stab at this because this was a hot topic at CLEC, but I will open it up first. So this is a question: is phlebotomy practice considered an interdisciplinary activity? So I'm going to assume this is coming from a program director that's not a phlebotomy program director. So if you are a non-phlebotomy program director, can you use some kind of partnership or cooperation with a phlebotomy program for interdisciplinary activities? So somebody can take a stab at this to see if A, I'm interpreting this question right, and B, a potential answer.
Sure, Mark, I can try to answer this.
Mm-hmm.
So an MLT or MLS program, yeah, you could use phlebotomy as an professional, but I would stretch a little bit and I would say, how can you really connect with other departments that are in healthcare? Is there a way to, if you are a phlebotomy or have a phlebotomy program, could you actually present phlebotomy to radiography or medical assistant students and connect those two departments? I mean, accessing veins is done by multiple professions. Are there other things you can think outside of the box? Do your students need to know how to enter certain rooms, infection control? Maybe you can have an event with nursing. Maybe if you have an EMT or paramedic program or department, you can connect with them. And how do students move about the equipment that might be in a room during a code or during an emergency situation? What is that crash cart? What does it entail? If you have a respiratory therapy program, can you have the respiratory therapy program present on ABG collections or what the ABG results mean to them? So try to stretch a little bit and consider the other programs. Even you could think on human services. Are there phlebotomy cases where it might be interesting to talk to human services about how perhaps could you recognize the signs of child abuse if you're doing a venipuncture on a child? There's just so many opportunities to connect with other departments outside of the lab, and oftentimes phlebotomy still is within the lab. So yeah, you could consider it interprofessional, but I would just try to stretch that a bit.
Thank you, Laura. I think that was great to talk about the minimum requirements, because again, the standards are just the minimum, but a lot of ideas about how to maybe push beyond that minimum. So that is our last question. So I'll start my thank yous. If there's anything else, please drop it in the chat or raise your hand. Thank you to all the presenters for not only making time today, but going through this process of developing all of this content. As Marissa said, this was kind of a quote unquote simple idea that kind of grew in the telling, to use a mixed metaphor. So it was a lot of fun to do. Some of the people involved here had maybe a little less time with quicker turnarounds than others. Appreciate your patience and appreciate everybody willing to do this. This will be available on the NAACLS News probably by the end of the week, as I said, with the PDF. Also, we are interested in developing maybe more long form content like this in the future. So we're going to try to put some kind of very, very short survey in that NAACLS News post. So I only mentioned that to say some people who attended this whole session may not check out that post because you've already watched this whole session, but please double check that NAACLS News post, because we'll probably have a very short survey to try to gather ideas. Again, we always try to continuously improve internally too. So how can we continue to offer, what lessons can we learn from this experience, and how can we continue to offer this in the future? So thank you everybody for participating, and we will talk to you in a few weeks at the next Dr. NAACLS.